The millionaire was there by chance. Or at least, that was what he thought. He was keeping an eye on his mother from a distance, the way he did every time she insisted on going out alone, that small act of freedom she still granted herself with fierce determination, when he saw the waitress stop. 15 minutes in which that young woman gave up tips, orders waiting in the kitchen, and peace with her boss, just so an elderly lady could eat lunch with dignity. In 15 minutes, that waitress did something that he, with all his money, had never known how to buy. What happened next changed everything. For her, for him, and for a mother who had been waiting to be found again for 20 years. If you love stories where one small gesture changes everything, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on the bell. Every week you'll find stories like this. Da Carmela restaurant was at the height of the lunch rush. That kind of warm, fragrant chaos that forms in places where people really eat. Silverware clinking against cheap ceramic plates, overlapping conversations. The rich smell of ragu soaking into every surface. Elena Martinelli, 23 years old, moved between the tables with that mechanical agility of someone who had learned not to think about the pain in her feet, because thinking about it would not make it go away. Her sneakers were worn down at the heel, bought 6 months earlier at an outlet store, and her mind was doing quick calculations about the rent that was 3 weeks overdue and the electric bill due in 2 days, without her still having figured out how she was going to pay it. She worked mornings at Da Carmela and afternoons at an industrial laundry, 2 shifts, 6 days a week, with Sunday reserved for catching up on sleep and calculating what she was still missing to make it to the end of the month. To most customers, she was just a figure in a stained apron, whose function was to make sure their order arrived hot and fast. But Elena had a gaze that went beyond the surface. She had learned it from her grandmother, the only person who had truly raised her, that small and stubborn woman who had taught her that you understand people by looking into their eyes, not at their face. It was that gaze that made her stop in front of the corner table, the one farthest from the window where the November sunlight barely reached, and the noise from the rest of the restaurant seemed muted. There sat a lady who looked out of place in all that confusion. Her hands, marked by time and the fragility of aging skin, were trembling in a rhythmic and persistent way, the unmistakable sign of advanced Parkinson's disease. She was trying, with an effort heartbreaking to anyone willing to really look, to bring a spoonful of minestrone to her mouth. With every attempt, the soup spilled before it reached its destination, staining the white tablecloth and the woman's chin. Her expression was not one of anger. It was one of deep resignation, of silent shame at no longer being able to perform the most basic act of human independence. Elena felt a knot rise in her throat. That scene was not just sadness, it was a mirror of her own story. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her in place of her absent mother, had lived her final months in the same struggle against her own body, that same daily war between willpower and hands that no longer obey. Without thinking about the tables waiting for her, without worrying about the owner who kept half an eye on her, Eleanor approached with that kind of delicacy no manual can teach, pulled up a chair and sat down beside the lady. "Would you allow me to help you?" she asked in a soft, calm voice. The woman lifted tired, watery eyes. "I have Parkinson's, dear. Sometimes my body forgets how to obey me. I didn't want to be a bother." "It's no bother at all," Elena replied, taking the spoon with steady patience. "We'll go slowly, at your pace. Are you in a hurry?" "Not at this hour." "Neither am I," Elena lied. She had 5 orders waiting in the kitchen and a customer at table 8 who was huffing dramatically. But in that moment, the outside world simply stopped existing. She began feeding the woman, blowing lightly on each spoonful, chatting about the weather, the taste of the soup, treating that elderly woman not like a patient or a burden, but like a person worthy of complete attention. What Elena did not know was that just a few feet away, leaning against a worn wooden column near the entrance, a man was watching her, unable to look away. Giacomo Ferrante, 41 years old, one of the richest businessmen in Lombardy, founder of 3 companies in logistics and industrial technology, was there for one specific reason: To follow his mother from a distance, the way he did every time she insisted on going out alone. That small act of freedom she still granted herself, with a fierceness he respected and feared at the same time. Giacomo was used to seeing the world through the lens of power and efficiency. Everything assessed, everything measured, everything optimized. In his companies, everything was transactional. He paid fortunes so his mother could have the best caregivers, the best nurses, the most expensive equipment the market could offer. He had hired physical therapists, specialized neurologists, certified companions, the very best money could buy. But he had never seen any of those professionals look at his mother with that light, that specific light he recognized immediately as real humanity, not professional competence. He timed it. It was 15 minutes. 15 minutes in which Elena gave up tips, productivity, probably peace with her boss, just to make sure a stranger could eat lunch with dignity, without rushing, without being made to feel like a burden. Giacomo felt something crack inside his chest. In that part of him, he had learned to keep protected by the coldness required in business. He, who had built an empire by being precise, and sometimes as hard as the job required, felt strangely small in the face of that girl's natural, unconscious greatness. When the woman finished eating, Elena wiped her chin with a napkin, brought her a glass of water, and smiled with the simplicity of someone who had done nothing extraordinary, only the right thing. "Are you satisfied, ma'am?" "Very much, dear. What is your name?" "Elena." "You're an angel, Elena. May God light your path." Elena jumped to her feet, realizing the owner was already walking toward her with an expression that was not exactly kind, and went back to work, throwing herself into the restaurant's chaos. Without imagining that something had just been set in motion, Giacomo approached his mother as soon as the waitress walked away, sat down in the seat Elena had occupied, and took the woman's trembling hand. "She was very kind, wasn't she, Mom?" "She treated me as if I were her grandmother, Giacomo. She did not see me as a sick old woman. She saw me." Giacomo said nothing more. He paid the bill, leaving a generous tip that Elena would only discover later. But he did not stop there. He spent the entire afternoon in his Milan office with his mind still in that neighborhood restaurant, then asked his assistant to gather whatever could be found about the employee named Elena Martinelli. What he found by the end of the day shook him even more than the scene he had already witnessed. Elena was motherless, raised by a grandmother who was now deceased. She lived in a rundown apartment on the outskirts, worked 2 jobs just to survive, had never had any help in life. She was the definition of a survivor, but a survivor who had not allowed hardship to harden her heart. The next morning, Giacomo returned to Da Carmela restaurant. It was not peak hour. The place was quiet. He was not wearing any of his work suits, but even so he carried that air of authority that certain people wear without realizing it. He sat down and waited for Elena to be free. When she approached with the menu, he looked her in the eyes without preamble. "I'm the son of the lady you helped yesterday." Elena turned pale for a moment, afraid she had done something wrong, that she had broken some protocol. "Oh, I hope I didn't disturb her. I just thought she needed help." "You didn't disturb her. You did something I can't buy with all the money I have. My name is Giacomo Ferrante." He handed her a business card. "I want you to work for me, not as a waitress. I want you to spend time with my mother. She needs someone with your heart close to her. I'm offering you triple what you make here, housing, all benefits." Elena looked at the card, then at the man. The Ferrante name was well known in the city, associated with major companies and almost legendary wealth. Anyone else would have accepted instantly. Elena hesitated. She remembered something her grandmother always used to say. "When the charity is too generous, even the saint gets suspicious." "With all due respect, Mr. Ferrante, thank you for the offer," she said, in a voice both firm and gentle. "But I didn't help your mother for money. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I'm not a professional companion. I can't accept something that feels like payment for kindness." Giacomo was stunned. He had never been turned down, and certainly not by someone who so clearly needed financial help. It's not payment, Elena. It's an investment. My mother is fading in loneliness, surrounded by nurses who treat her like a medical file. She needs life. She needs someone like you. Please, think about it. Elena placed the business card back on the counter. I'll think about it, but I'm not promising anything. She went back to the kitchen, leaving the millionaire sitting there alone with a bruised ego and his admiration intact. That evening, Giacomo spoke with his mother. Mrs. Ida, knowing about Elena's refusal, smiled with the quiet wisdom of people who have lived long enough. You tried to buy her, Giacomo. I made an offer. People like that girl don't have a price. They have values. If you want her close to us, let her see that we have a soul too, not just bank accounts. On the third day, Giacomo returned to the restaurant, but this time he brought his mother with him. They arrived when Elena's shift was ending. The girl, seeing Mrs. Ida, broke into a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. Mrs. Ida, what a lovely surprise to see you here again. The older woman took Elena's hand in both of her trembling hands. My son is a stubborn man who thinks everything can be solved with contracts. But I'm asking you as a woman who feels very lonely. Come have coffee at my house tomorrow. Just coffee, no job commitment. I want to tell you a story. Eleanor, disarmed by that direct and sincere vulnerability, accepted. The next day she went to the Ferrante villa in the Brianza area. The luxury was intimidating, all marble, fine woods, manicured gardens. But Mrs. Ida's welcome was as warm as that of any ordinary home. They sat in the garden, in the November sun that still offered a few hours of mild warmth, and it was there that the past began to weave itself into the present. I want to tell you about a woman named Anna, Mrs. Ida began. She was my housekeeper many years ago, young, full of life, very much like you in the way she moved, in the way she looked at people. She became pregnant and had no one in the world. I took her in. Her son was born in this house. Eleanor listened in silence, with a strange feeling running down her spine, though she could not name it. And what happened to her? Mrs. Ida's expression darkened. She disappeared, vanished, when my son Giacomo was only 3 years old. My brother Renato, who handled family business at the time, said she had left of her own free will, that she had found another man and abandoned us. But I never fully believed it. Giacomo, who had been listening to the conversation from a distance, stepped closer. His eyes met Elena's, with an expression she could not immediately decipher. I recently discovered the truth, he said. My uncle Renato lied. He threatened her and drove her out of town so she would have no rights to anything, not even to the inheritance my father wanted to leave her. I found her 3 years ago. She's alive, but she's sick and living in difficult conditions. I've been taking care of her in secret, trying to find the courage to tell my mother and bring her back here. But Anna is afraid. She thinks I hate her. And she has a daughter she had years later, but had to leave with her grandmother because she didn't have the means to give her a decent life. Elena's heart was beating so hard she thought it could be heard throughout the garden. What was Anna's daughter's name? She whispered. Giacomo took one step forward and handed her an envelope. Her name is Anna Martinelli, and the daughter she never forgot is you, Elena. The silence that followed was absolute. The villa, the flowers, the millionaire, and the elderly lady faded away. At the center of that moment, there was only a 23-year-old girl who had just discovered that her kindness toward a stranger had brought her back to her own origin, that the most natural and spontaneous gesture of her life had led her straight to the answer to the most painful question she had ever carried inside her. Elena felt her legs give out and steadied herself against the chair beside her. The envelope Giacomo was holding out to her seemed to weigh tons, even though it was only thin paper. She opened it with trembling hands. The same hands that days earlier had brought soup to Mrs. Ida's mouth with such steadiness and care. Those same hands. Inside was a photograph. Yellowed with age, the edges rounded from use, like a picture someone had kept in a pocket for years, always carrying it with them. A young woman with eyes identical to hers was holding a child in front of an iron gate that Eleanor recognized immediately. It was the gate of the villa where she was standing at that very moment, the same gate she had passed through just hours earlier without knowing what it meant to her. On the back of the photograph, in hurried but careful handwriting, "For my little Elena, so that she may never forget that love is the only thing no one can take away from us." Tears began to fall, heavy and warm, blurring the image until it became an oval of color. Mrs. Ida, forgetting for a moment the limits of Parkinson's, stood up and embraced the young woman tightly. Elena's crying was not sadness. It was the sound of something melting after remaining solid and motionless for too long, the release of 20 years of a question she had stopped believing would ever be answered. For 23 years she had believed she had been abandoned for lack of love, that her mother had simply chosen another life. Now the truth was being revealed. She and Giacomo were the two ends of the same tragedy, woven by the greed of a man who was no longer alive to answer for what he had done. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Elena asked, looking at Giacomo through tears. "I had to be sure who you were," he replied, and his voice had lost all executive hardness. "When I saw you taking care of my mother in the restaurant, I felt something I couldn't explain. The name, the way you were, your eyes, everything. My uncle didn't just drive Anna away, he tried to erase her existence. I grew up hating the woman who gave me life without knowing she had been forced to leave, while you grew up carrying the emptiness of her absence." Mrs. Ida, still holding Elena, looked at her son. "Giacomo, we have to go to her now." They left the next morning at dawn. 4 hours of travel toward a small town in the Po Valley, the landscape changing from highway to provincial roads to narrow country lanes. Elena looked out the window thinking about how her life had changed in less than a week. She had walked out of a double shift at a neighborhood restaurant and stepped into a story she still could not fully see. They arrived at a small brick house, simple but well kept, with pots of geraniums at the entrance that reminded her of the Ferrante Villa garden. A trait of Anna's personality that not even 20 years of hardship had managed to erase. Giacomo parked and turned to Elena. "Are you ready?" "I've been waiting for this my whole life," she answered, even without knowing it. Inside, sitting in an armchair wrapped in a wool shawl, was Anna. She was thin, her face marked by illness and by 20 years of fear lived in the shadows. But when her eyes met Elena's, there was a spark that challenged everything else in that room. Anna tried to stand, but weakness would not let her. Elena crossed the room running and fell to her knees at her feet. "Mom." That was all she could say, and it was enough. The reunion became a tangle of forgiveness and explanations that had been waiting 20 years. Anna told how Renato had intercepted her one afternoon while she was coming home from work, threatened to kill her, told her he would take little Giacomo away from her forever if she did not disappear within 24 hours. She had fled with what little she had, pregnant with Elena, and had spent years in hiding with the constant fear that the Ferrante family's power would catch up with her. She had worked in fields, in houses, anywhere they would accept someone without references, all to protect the daughter she carried in her womb. "I left you with your grandmother because I thought they had found me," Anna explained, stroking Elena's hair. "I didn't want you to suffer the consequences of that man's hatred. I always watched you from a distance, Elena. Every job you took, every achievement. I was there in the shadows, praying you would be stronger than I was." Giacomo stepped closer and took his mother's hand. "The nightmare is over. Renato is gone now and justice will be done. Not the justice of the courts, but the justice of the heart. You're coming back with us." The return to Milan marked the beginning of something completely new. Giacomo spared no resources. Anna was admitted to one of the best rehabilitation centers in the country, and Elena, who just a week earlier had been serving tables to survive, began studying healthcare administration, while personally helping oversee both her mother's rehabilitation and Mrs. Ida's care. The Ferrante Villa, which had once been a monument to loneliness and money, became a real home, full of life and voices. Elena did not accept Giacomo's money as a gift. She insisted on working, on earning her place. Giacomo, respecting the strength of that newly found sister, appointed her director of the Elena Costa Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting elderly people with degenerative diseases and helping women in vulnerable situations like the one her mother had lived in for 20 years. The girl who had not had enough money for rent was now managing millions to make sure no one would live what she and her mother had lived through. Months later, a gala was organized for the official launch of the foundation. Giacomo looked impeccable in his tuxedo, but his eyes were searching the room for only one person. Elena entered, wearing a simple, elegant blue dress, no flashy jewelry. Her greatest jewel was the smile of peace she carried now, the one she had never had before. Beside her, in a motorized wheelchair, was Anna, recovered enough to enjoy the moment, to be there among people instead of hidden in the shadows. Mrs. Ida, proud, watched them both, one by blood, one by heart, united by a bond that money could never have created or bought. "You changed everything, Elena," Giacomo said as he approached his sister in the crowded hall. "It wasn't my gesture," she replied. "It was your gaze in that restaurant. If you had looked the other way, we all would have remained lost in our separate stories." Elena looked around the hall full of influential people, but her mind went back to the corner table at Da Carmela, to the trembling in Mrs. Ida's hands, to the ache in her own feet inside those worn-out shoes. "People think big changes come from big revolutions," she said softly. "But the truth is, the world changes through small gestures. A bowl of soup served with love can tear down walls that decades of power couldn't move." Mrs. Ida, before passing away a few years later, left a will that divided her share of the family fortune equally between Giacomo and Elena. Recognizing Elena as the granddaughter life had brought her in the most unexpected way. But the greatest inheritance was not the financial one. It was a letter read on the day the foundation opened its own headquarters. "Wealth," the letter said, "is like fire. It can warm a house or destroy it. What determines the outcome is the hand that guides the flame. Elena brought light when we were in darkness. Giacomo brought the fuel so that light could reach others. May they never forget that true nobility lies not in a family name, but in the ability to stop when everyone else is in a hurry." Years later, Elena would bring her children into the villa garden, show them the yellowed photograph of Anna, and tell them the story of the soup with the simplicity of someone who knows that important things do not need to be made bigger than they are. She wanted them to understand that the Ferranti family's true inheritance was not the companies or the properties, but the courage to be kind in a world that too often rewards hardness and indifference. In every trembling hand she held in the foundation's facilities, Elena saw Mrs. Ida's face, Anna's face, and her own reflection from that morning at the corner table at Da Carmela, the girl with the worn shoes and overdue rent who had chosen to stop for 15 minutes instead of walking on. The constant reminder that, in the end, we are all each other's caretakers, that the threads connecting us already exist before we can see them, and that sometimes one small and genuine act is enough to make them visible. There is something in this story that concerns all of us, not just Elena and Giacomo. How many times a day do we walk past someone who needs help and decide not to stop because we are in a hurry, because it is not our job, because surely someone else will do it? Elena had 5 orders waiting, 1 customer huffing, and an owner keeping an eye on her. She chose to stop anyway, not because she was extraordinarily brave, but because it was the thing you do when someone in front of you needs help. And in that gesture, 15 minutes, 1 spoonful of soup, 1 smile with no hidden motive, she set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. Not even her. She did not do it for gain. She did not know who was watching from the corner of the dining room. She did not imagine that woman was the mother of someone capable of changing her life. She did it because it was the right thing to do in the moment. The right thing appeared before her. And that is the purest and rarest form of goodness there is. The kind that calculates nothing, that does not wait for the perfect moment, that does not choose its recipient based on what it might receive in return. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel right now. Every week, you'll find stories like this. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things without even knowing it. stories in which goodness comes back when no one expects it anymore. Turn on the bell so you don't miss a single video, and tell me in the comments, would you have stopped at that corner table, or would you have kept walking?